Hello again, Interblobs. I'm here for another episode of I Played a Thing, Space Harrier and Friends, and... oh dear. I've been kind of dreading this episode. You see, if you've been here for a while, you've probably noticed that I tend to be pretty positive about the games I feature. Even some games that many would consider bad or at least boring, I'll often find something I like about them, and that'll be the focus of my coverage. Well, the time has finally come to take a look at the last original title in the Space Harrier series, and it's Planet Harriers. And I kind of hate it. Let us first set the stage, though. The year is 2000. It's been 12 years since the release of Space Harrier 2, and video games have changed. The Genesis is long gone, having been replaced by the Saturn, which in turn stepped aside for the Dreamcast. On the arcade front, the sprite-based 3D of Sega's Superscaler tech has made way for the Dreamcast-based Naomi board. On all fronts, 2D is falling increasingly out of favor, and the polygon reigns. Just 1 year after achieving near parity between their coin-op and console platforms with the similar Naomi and Dreamcast, Sega, in pursuit of greater technological achievement on the arcade front, debuted the new Hikaru board in 1999 with the launch of Brave Firefighters. Hikaru was a major evolutionary step, sporting 2 Hitachi SH4 CPUs to Naomi's 1, and a custom GPU capable of pushing over 14 times as many flat-shaded polygons as the NEC Power VR2 powering Naomi and the Dreamcast. Not to mention, it was the first gaming hardware of any kind to natively support Phong shading. In short, Hikaru was a monster, easily putting Sega at the top of the heap for real-time 3D performance in its day. And yet, for all that, it was not very successful. Only 6 Hikaru-powered games were ever released, and its own predecessor, Naomi, outlived it by 7 years. The reason for this was simple. Hikaru was stupidly expensive. In this context, I can just imagine the process leading to our game du jour. Hey guys, Brave Firefighters and NASCAR Arcade were great and all, but this here is the most powerful gaming hardware on the planet, and it costs a goddamn fortune. If we're really gonna move units with our next project, we've gotta come up with something that'll melt everyone's faces off so hard, even the most miserly arcade operators won't be able to resist it. Now come on, we need a hook. Hey, what about that thing AM2 cranked out way back when? The one that blew everyone's mind back in the mid-80s? Harry the Spaceman or whatever? And so, Planet Harriers was born. In its favor, I will say this, it really did look fantastic. The current state of Hikaru emulation is far from mature, so I'll only be able to show it to you through a veil of substantial graphical glitching, and it's aged about as well as you'd expect from a polygonal engine now old enough to get a driver's license, but in 2000, faces were most definitely melted. Unfortunately, in your Thing Player's humble opinion, that's about as much as it has going for it. As a long-awaited sequel, it's a Harrier game in name only. The play mechanics are heavily tilted toward lock-on lasers, resulting in what feels more like the misshapen offspring of Afterburner and Panzer Dragoon. The music is just kinda there. There's been a clear tonal shift, taking a series known for being colorful and fantastical, but largely played straight, tossing out all of its internal mythology, and bringing it into the realm of the shamelessly twee. Even Harrier himself is sitting this one out, and the cast they brought in to replace him, well, you'll see soon enough. So, yeah. No doubt Planet Harriers has sincere fans, and it is not my intention to shit in your sandbox. I readily admit to harboring Dead Sea levels of salt over the way it paid off a 15-year wait for a proper arcade sequel to my favorite game, and a 12-year wait for a new Harrier game at all. And even doing my best to put aside my rampant Space Harrier fanboyism and evaluate Planet Harriers on its own merits, I can't help but conclude that it still just isn't all that good. But mileages will vary, and I am the old man yelling at Cloud who didn't like Super Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time either. Most overly long-winded intro yet aside then, I welcome you along as I bitch and grumble my way through a rare Hikaru showpiece, and invite you to draw your own conclusions. Welcome to my disappointment zone. Get salty! Alright, what do you say we get this shit show on the road? Again, I hope you don't find that I'm being too negative. This isn't a completely terrible game, I just think it's rather lackluster, and in particular as a Space Harrier follow-up, super, super disappointing for my money.
Presented by Sega.
Oh, another present from Sega. And it's not even April Fool's. And Amusement Vision is one of Sega's internal dev teams, and they're the ones responsible for this, for better and for worse. Now I'm going to be letting this go through its intro and through part of the attract mode, because we will eventually get a little tutorial, and that's helpful in understanding the basics of the game. As I mentioned before, the visuals in Planet Harriers don't look as impressive today as they used to. As a matter of fact, they only look about Dreamcast grade on Demel here, which is the emulator I'm using to record this. But, as I also mentioned in the intro, Hikaru emulation is not really all the way there yet. This does look somewhat better in terms of lighting, shading, and so on the actual hardware. But even then, a lot of the things that were really special about this game's visuals when it came out are commonplace now, so we'll just have to take my word for it. This was really mind-blowing visually when it first came out. And as this sort of quasi-demo suggests, this does have a two-player simultaneous mode, but that requires linked cabinets, and even finding a signal cabinet for this game was hard enough. And here we have that tutorial I was talking about. Up, down, right, and left are exactly what you'd expect. And anytime you move the stick quickly, you do a dodge move, which really kind of comes out too easily, but more on that later. You have a gun as usual, which is kind of a machine gun type weapon instead of the single-shot cannon of previous Harrier games. And it really feels a lot like Afterburner's gun, more than Space Harrier's, which is one of the reasons I liken this game to Afterburner. And then you have the lock-on laser, which is limited by your lock-on fuel and is really your main offensive weapon in this. Now the only way you can get money is by using the lock-on laser, which really incentivizes using that and discourages use of the gun, which is another problem that I have with this game. The lock-on laser is already too focal, in my opinion, which removes a lot of the shooting feel of the previous Harrier games. The gun is already not very effective in most situations, and to further de-incentivize it by making the lock-on laser the only way you can get paid, I think that was a really bad idea, and gold is important in this game. Planet Harriers does have shops. Shops are the only way you can get power-ups, and upgrades are really important to surviving in this game. You can't really tell it from the way I play this run-through, because I spend much more sparingly than I should. I play it a little too conservative, saving up for upgrades. But yeah, if you actually want to stay alive and not just credit feed your way through the game, which I largely end up doing, then yeah, you really want to make sure you have plenty of money to spend. And as it shows here in two-player mode, you can do double lock-ons, and you can link up with the other player in order to restore your health, but again, the link cabinets for this game were particularly rare. I mean, even the single-player cabinet was rare enough, so that is an option you would probably not have in most cases of finding this game in the wild.
Planet Harriers.
And that's about all for the attract mode, so we're gonna jump on in. And you see, as I mentioned before, we have 4 characters to select from. There's Glenn the cop, Corey the nurse, Nick the baseball player, and X the guitarist. And I'm going to go with Glenn because he is the least annoying. You see, this game has a little bit of a won't shut the fuck up problem. As I mentioned before, the dodge move is really sensitive, Like, really, any less than gentle touch on the stick will cause your character to do that dodge move. And they do a yell, or a call, or some sort of vocalization every time they do it. Glenn's is a little less annoying than most. Otherwise, you'll have potentially awful sounds coming out. Like, Nick isn't too bad, but if you're playing as Corey, or worst of all, X is just god-awful. He lets out this horrible screech every time he does a dodge move, and it will make you not want to live. This is a kind of problem I've had with a lot of games. Like, if there's interesting dialogue constantly happening in a game, like the kind of banter that you get in Taro Yoko games, like Nier or the Drakengard series, in those you have a lot of dialogue between your main character and your allies, which just happens really, really frequently. But if it's actual dialogue like that, I'm fine with it. It helps keep things interesting and helps develop the characters, so that's cool. But if it's just constant, meaningless noise, that really turns me off and just gets on my nerves. It's one of the reasons that I'm not as big on the post-Super Nintendo Mario games. Like, Charles Martinet is a great voice actor, nothing against him, but the constant, needless hooting and yelping from Mario every time anything happens ever, it just makes me want to throw things. Oh well. We're coming up on our first shop, so I should probably talk about the actual game we're playing.
Hello, how are you?
Now, naturally, on an actual arcade machine, you would be able to see what things cost, but Hikaru emulation, again, is not mature at this point, and does not actually allow you to see the prices here, so I have to buy things blindly, and that's why I spend a little more cautiously than I really should. The most important thing is to make sure you keep your lock-on fuel upgraded, because lock-on fuel directly determines how many things you can lock onto at any one time. And I would also be buying heart containers if I were worried about staying alive, but I have a limitless supply of virtual quarters, so that's not so much of a thing to worry about. But on an arcade machine, of course, you're not going to want to feed actual money into it constantly, so that's another thing you would prioritize. Again, I spend way more cautiously than I should. You also probably noticed there the big bomb. That is something that the tutorial section didn't cover. That's pretty much what you'd expect. It's just a smart bomb type weapon that hurts everything on the screen. Now here we see one thing that I do like about Planet Harriers. It has a little more variety in the types of projectiles that enemies fire at you, and I like the idea of these rings that you can pass through as long as you don't hit the sides. You do, by the way, have only a single life. When you run out of hearts, you do die, and that is a game over. But being an arcade game, this is pretty generous about letting you continue. You do start off right where you left off, so no big deal there. And I think these long, vaguely Eastern-style dragons that we're seeing here toward the end of the stage are indeed references to dear old Squilla. So Planet Harriers isn't completely ignorant of its roots, just mostly. Got a little careless there. Something that can happen in this is that there's a trade-off between dodging and staying in place to collect the money that flies out of enemies you just blew up. Volcandra's necks here are supposed to be solid. Again, the fact that you can't see parts of the neck here, most of the neck in fact, is another limitation of Hikaru emulation as it currently stands. I'm sure it'll get better in the future. And for Volcandra, you just want to lock onto the faces when they open their mouth. And that's really about all there is to it. Pretty easy first boss. The guns can help speed things up a little, but only so much. Again, this game is really, really, really focused on the lock-on laser.
That was easy.
Yeah, I said so, Glenn. I'm fine, thank you. The large lock-on site doesn't seem to last very long, and it's really not worth the money in my experience. There is, by the way, always a star shop at the end of each stage. Only some stages have them in the middle, but you'll always get to do a shopping trip at the end of a level. So, now that you've seen the 4 normally playable characters and both of the shopkeepers, are you starting to see what I mean about there being a tonal shift in this game? 'Cause, I mean, the 4 standard selectable characters, they're all kind of like 90s wrestling gimmicks. Like, hey, I'm the flying cop, I'm the flying baseball player, I'm the flying nurse, and I'm the flying rock star. And there actually is one secret character that you can get by putting in a code at the character select screen, that being Opa Opa, the little spaceship guy from the Fantasy Zone series on the Master System and Genesis. And that's cool. It's always nice to see Sega recognizing the old school, but I mean, if you're gonna recognize some old school, I mean, by all means leave Opa Opa in, I'm entirely cool with that, but would it have killed you to make a second hidden character that was, I don't know, Harrier? The guy who the series is named after? Just a thought. So yeah, the 4 standard characters are kind of goofy. Oh, and by the way, Opa Opa will also resurrect you when you continue, as you can see. Another kind of nice touch. But as I was saying, the standard 4 are all kind of goofy, and the hidden character, Opa Opa, as much as it's good to see him again, is also from sort of a lighter, cuter series. Not to say that Space Harrier has ever been grimdark, and I wouldn't want it to be, but what I mean is this. The classic Space Harrier games, the arcade original and the 2 follow-ups on the Master System and the Genesis, they were very bright and colorful, and even a little cartoony, but they were played straight. Internally, they took themselves seriously. Like, they just presented a straight-up story, the Space Harrier saga, and that was that. Whereas Planet Harriers here, you've got the 4 main characters that I've already said enough about, and you've got the shopkeepers, who are the buff wind-up guy, and the ridiculously breathy lady with the padlock on her dress. The whole thing just kind of feels like it's taking the piss, as they might say in jolly old England. It's kind of a gag, you know? This game is silly. And I'm not trying to say that's inherently a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, Parodius, Twinbee, bring 'em on. But as a follow-up to the 80s Space Harrier games, which again were played fairly straight, it just seems like this completely unnecessary sideways leap for no good reason. Like, anyone remember Munchies? This kind of a B monster movie from back in the day, and then it had this sequel called Munchies Singular that was for some bizarre reason a cornball family comedy. Like, what the fuck? And I feel like that's what happened between Space Harrier 2 and Planet Harriers. And if this game has any sort of a story to it, I have no idea what that would be. Nothing in the intro, nothing in the attract mode really gives any indication of that. And while the story was never the focus of the previous Space Harrier games, they had one. They had kind of a cohesive, well, semi-cohesive line, because there was some confusion about the order of the first 2, but they had a more or less coherent, ongoing story that I think was really set up for some cool shit at the end of Space Harrier 2, with Dark Harrier and all that, and this game just kinda chucks all that aside. But I'll quit bitching for the moment. We have a boss fight here. Cycloba, as the game says, although I would think the pronunciation would better be Cycleba, like Cyclops amoeba, but whatever. Anyway, this is actually kind of a cool concept for a boss fight. I got no beef with it. The Cycleba just kind of goes inside the network of nerves or whatever they are, and you can turn around freely and point yourself toward it to give yourself an opportunity to draw a bead on it when it pops out. And it's got some good bullet patterns. It's a pretty good boss fight, I think, overall. course, the emulation isn't too clean on it, but that's a problem of Demmel's handling of Hikaru at this time, and not a problem with the game itself. It probably would have been a good idea for me to try and shoot down some of these tracking eyeballs rather than just try and evade them constantly, because that didn't really work out for me. Ah well. Well, like I said before, it's not exactly like I have to worry about quarters. From here on out, though, it's mostly just going to be spread shots that I can fairly easily dodge on the vertical axis, so it shouldn't take too much longer. Well, we'll take one more to the face, apparently, but that's okay. In the end, Glenn is victorious. Yeah! And as usual, we'll make our trip to the Star Shop, and I will continue on increasing my maximum lock-on fuel. If I were playing intelligently, I would also pick up a life case and increase my maximum health, but like I said, I was too careful. And so we will move on to the third stage, which is simply titled Lava. And as we move into lava, I will resume my kvetching. Aren't you thrilled? Now, one thing that I really dislike about this that I mentioned before is Space Harrier and its earlier sequels. They were really focused around shooting. Just firing your gun at things, aim, shoot, your big old cannon blast goes at them, and they fall down. This game, the gun isn't really good for much. It fires a lot faster, it's like machine gun type, and there's really no reason to ever stop holding down the trigger for it. But its effective range is really quite short, and as we discussed earlier, shooting down enemies with the gun does not get you any of the much needed gold that you would get for destroying the same enemies with the lock-on laser. On top of that, I'm gonna break out some of my own terminology here. Just so you know, it's not supposed to be any kind of official terminology, but hopefully you'll understand what I mean. The previous Space Harrier games used what I call forward aiming. That is to say, no matter what direction you're moving, like you could be strafing up, down, left, right, you'll always fire straight forward. So, regardless of your character's movement, and if the checkerboard is like changing perspective to keep track of you, you'll always fire straight ahead toward the horizon, as if along an invisible perspective line. Whereas a lot of games of this type will use what I call directed aiming. That's where, as you move up, down, left, right, your character turns a little bit to face in that direction, and your shots will also go the way the character is facing. And in most cases you'll have a crosshair to help you adjust your aim accordingly. And that's the kind of aiming that this game uses. So while you're dodging left or right, or up or down or whatever, your aim is also shifting to keep track of where you're pointed. And that is another thing that really kind of reduces the effectiveness of the gun in this game. And just like the more goofy, comical tone of Planet Harriers, I don't think directed aiming is always a terrible thing by any means. It's just a question of whether it's a good thing for this game as a Space Harrier sequel, or a good thing for this game as a game on its own merits. And I don't think it really works in either context. Now for contrast, let's take what I would consider a positive example of a game with directed aiming. Star Fox 64. In my opinion, the best game in its series, and one of the best Space Harrier-ish games that I've ever played. Love me some Star Fox 64, and it uses directed aiming. But the game is paced and balanced accordingly. And I'm gonna hold that thought for a moment as we cruise on into the Star Shop again, and speak of the devil, get our first opportunity for a gun upgrade. The gun in this is never gonna be as good as the lock-on laser, but you do get a few opportunities to upgrade it at the shops, and at least make it somewhat more effective. So now we're gonna have a couple of Gradius options on our left and right to provide a little supporting fire. However, the twin shot does kind of screw with the graphics emulation in this level, so I'm going to have to stop using it for a little while. Once we get into the next level, the graphical glitching will stop and I'll be able to start using it again. But for now, I'm going to deliberately limit myself to the lock-on laser. But speaking of the gun, Star Fox 64, as I was saying before our shopping trip, I consider very much an example of a Space Harrier-influenced, Space Harrier-type game. It uses direct aim, and it does just fine with it. And the reason for that, I think, is that the game understands its own mechanics. It understands how its aiming works, and is paced and structured accordingly, so that it never becomes a problem. You always have time to swerve out of the way, get back into position, and resume firing your laser at whatever it is you're trying to blow up. The game does have a lock-on fire method, but you're not completely dependent of it. The direct-aimed standard laser is always really useful. And I think the game's pace being a little more deliberate contributes to that being so effective. By contrast, let's look at the original Space Harrier, or another good example of forward aiming, Night Striker. In both of those games, everything's always coming at you really, really fast, you're always moving, always dodging, and you don't really have the time to concentrate on both your aim and your evasion. You have to pretty much be doing both simultaneously at all times. And the forward aiming means that, you know, no matter what way you're dodging, or what way you're getting into position, your shots are always going to go straight ahead. Star Fox 64 isn't really paced that way, and it doesn't have to be. And I feel like I'm kind of talking in circles here, and I hope I'm making a bit of sense. If not, well, just trust me on the fact that it makes perfect sense inside my head. Anyway, back to the game we're actually playing. This boss is Sphinx, and it's kind of a swarm boss, which is fine by me. Certainly a grand tradition of those in Space Harrier games. Just like Cycleba, during this boss fight you can freely turn and change your heading to keep the enemies in your sights, and blast away at all the little Sphinxes with your lock-on laser, because God only knows you're not going to aim at them with the gun. And next to the boss's life bar there, you can see a little enemies counter that shows you how many of the small Sphinxes are left, and you just need to chip away at them, shoot them down, and get them out of the way so that you can go ahead and take on the core Sphinx. It works fairly well. Credit where due. And since I really don't have a whole lot more to say about this boss fight, I'm gonna go ahead and launch right back into my theorizing. Now, the reason that I think this game not only doesn't feel like Space Harrier through its use of directed aiming, but that it doesn't really work that well on its own merits, is that this game wants to be paced like Space Harrier while having a shooting system like Afterburner. In Afterburner, you had a very rapid-fire Gatling gun with a short, effective range, and it worked okay because Afterburner was Afterburner. But this is a game with a very fast, high-dodging kind of rate of things happening, and so the directed aim ends up being really ineffective. And okay, you have the lock-on laser, and that kind of solves that problem, but the fact remains you have a gun and it's only very situationally useful. It's like the Afterburner gun. And, you know, nothing against Afterburner, but if I want Afterburner, I know where to find it.
That was easy.
Not sure I agree with you there, Glenn. But anyway. So, yeah. Back to the Star Shop we go. I don't think there's going to be any special upgrades in this one. Oh, it does have the life insurance, which is just like a 1-up, but since I'm just using virtual quarters, I don't really care.
Have a nice day.
And with that, we will be moving on to Stage 4, which has the very straightforward name of Cavern. This is a rather cool-looking stage with some underwater stretches, which I'm always a sucker for. Unfortunately, its boss is not nearly as well designed as the last few we saw, but we will cross that bridge when we come to it. Anyway, something I imagine a few people have been thinking is, wait a minute. If you want a Space Harrier follow-up with forward aiming, then could you really make that work in a true 3D game with a polygonal environment? Well, I think you could. I know it hasn't been tried much, but we are eventually going to get to the PS2 Sega Ages remake of the original Space Harrier, I'm going to be doing that as the last video in the Space Harrier and Friends series, but when we get to that, you'll see that the game has been remade in a fully polygonal environment, with full 3D models for everything, and it still maintains the same forward aiming, and it works completely fine. So I know it's doable. I know it's not, like, inherently impossible because of the shift in how the game is rendered. You might have to engage in some fairly heavy trickery, like, I don't know, I'm not a game developer, but, I don't know, maybe making it so that your character is constantly rotated a little bit to make sure they're pointing toward the horizon, so that they always have a consistent heading, no matter which way you go swooping and which way the camera moves. I don't know, that's just one guess that I have as to how you might make it work. But my point is this: the Sega Ages remake of the original Space Harrier proves it does work, and can work. The remake, a little spoiler here, is actually really good, and I like it quite a lot. But, yeah, getting back to the game that we're actually playing, there's just so much about Planet Harriers that I wish worked, but just doesn't. It's a beautiful game, as I've been saying, it has some nice boss designs, and it tries. I mean, it tries. And here's another thing I like. I completely got ruined by it, but we have these sea urchin type enemies that just shoot out their spikes in every direction like a big forest, and you have to either destroy them in time to get that out of your way, or you have to kind of weave through all the extending spikes. And I think that's a really cool idea. I don't do very well with it here, but it's fun. It's gives you a nice feeling of weaving and evasion. It works really nicely. But overall, I just can't get behind this one, you know? Like, I've never been much of an Afterburner type of guy, but 6 years after this, in 2006, Sega released Afterburner Climax, which was developed by AM2, just like the original Afterburner. And Afterburner Climax is great. I'm not even that into the Afterburner series in general, but I will play the shit out of some Climax, and that's because it knows what it wants to be. It wants to be a new Afterburner game. It wants to continue in the tradition of classic Afterburner, just with more tech and some new mechanics, like a bullet time feature and an armor meter, and it does really well with it. Afterburner Climax is completely true to its roots. It does new things, and it does new things that work. And that, I think, is where Planet Harriers just falls short. It doesn't know what it wants to be. To the extent that it does know what it wants to be, it doesn't really do a very good job of making that happen. I really hate to be this salty and negative in one of my videos, but it's just how I feel about this. I mean, if I'm going to be thorough in my covering of the Space Harrier series, I do have to address this game. Otherwise, you know, when I don't like a game, I usually just don't cover it. But this one, it's part of the Space Harrier series. I'm going to do a video on it, and I've got to be honest with you folks, I just don't like it very much, and I don't think it really succeeds at being either a good Space Harrier sequel or a particularly good game in its own right. It's not terrible, it doesn't make me want to throw up directly on my shoes or anything, but there's nothing particularly engaging about it. Like, back in the day, you might play it just for the visuals, just as sort of a feast of the cutting edge of polygonal technology, but that's certainly not the case anymore. And now we have the Stage 4 boss, Star Eater. This boss is complete bullshit. You will see in a moment it has a number of life meters, and one of them is a little longer than the other. You have to attack the one of its arms that has the color of the long life meter, otherwise it'll just continually regenerate and you'll never do any lasting damage to it. What I'm doing now is just cheesing it with my big bombs, which as far as I can tell is the only way for a normal human to beat this boss halfway effectively. Your guns, no way you're going to target accurately enough or far enough to hit that one specific arm, and your lock-on laser locks onto everything you sweep it over, which in most cases is going to be several arms, and that's just going to screw you. So you just kind of have to hang in there the best you can after spending all of your big bombs. hopefully you've done enough damage at that point that most of the arms will be gone. You'll only have a few left to spread your shots over, and it won't be regenerating all the time. See, one of them just regenerated on me there. But yeah, no doubt there are people who can legitimately play through this boss correctly without using the big bomb cheese on it, but I can't really see how that's doable by anyone who's not really dedicated to this game, and like I've been saying, I'm not nearly fond enough of this game to be that dedicated to it. Fortunately, once you've got past the color matching bullshit, the rest of Star Eater is a pretty straightforward boss fight, and you just blaze away at it and it'll go down soon enough. Of course, if you're of middling skill at this game, such as I am, you're probably still going to eat a few shots, but you'll get through eventually, just like we did here. I don't know what you're so happy about, Glenn. That was a total bullshit victory.
Hi. How are you doing?
Ah well, the important thing is we can head to the Star Shop and pick up the final shot upgrade, the laser gun. One of the reasons I spent so conservatively throughout the game is that I wasn't sure how much the laser gun was going to cost, and I wanted to make sure I could afford it. It turned out I had way more than enough money to actually pick that up, and ended up with a lot left over, and I could have gone ahead and bought a lot of life containers along the way, but hindsight 2020. And at least the laser gun does look really cool, and within its short range, unlike the other shots, it packs a pretty decent punch. So, within the short range that it fires, it actually is fairly useful. But again, the directed aiming means you can't really concentrate on your aim that much. You have to rely on your lock-on laser for most things, and well, it just is what it is. Anyway, we have now moved into the final stage, which is called Galax. And it's a very cool-looking stage out in deep space. While it is rather cool-looking, it has some of the biggest bullshit in the game, which is going to be the speed tunnel that comes up in a little while. For now, though, things aren't too bad. I'm taking my share of hits, but at least I see where they're coming from. Once we get into the speed tunnel, that's not going to really be the case anymore. We do have to be a little more careful of obstacles here. In addition to enemy projectiles, we do have things appearing in the way, which is fine. Any Space Harrier game's gonna have that. Oh, here's the speed tunnel. Here's the bullshit. I actually don't do too bad on it this time, but in some of my other attempts at this part of the game, I'm just taking hits constantly, and I can't see what the fuck is going on. This all just scrolls back, or scrolls forward too quickly, and the textures are all kind of noisy and blend into each other, and I seriously cannot see what is happening. Like, I just have to keep sweeping around, firing my lasers, firing my lock-ons, and just praying that I don't take too many hits. It doesn't really seem like you're supposed to be able to tell what's going on here. It might just be a straight-up quarter muncher sequence. No, we've got another Star Shop.
Welcome. How are you doing?
We've already got the final upgrade for our gun, so there's nothing more here than just another life container and another lock-on fuel container, but I'll take them, whatever. Got nothing else to spend my money on at this point.
Thanks. Have a nice flight.
I'll try, shopkeeper, I'll try. Anyway, as I was saying, that part just always seemed like total bullshit to me, and all I can say is that's really the way it seems to me. On the other hand, I freely admit it may just be because I'm old and my reaction time isn't what it used to be. Like, I remember when I tried playing Bayonetta. Bayonetta was just too nuts for me, too chaotic. I could not keep track of everything that was happening on the screen, and I just felt like I was flailing blindly half the time, so, you know, I'm just gonna yell at a cloud here and tell you to get off my lawn and say, maybe it's me. Maybe it's me. Well, on a more positive note, I think this part of the stage looks really cool, with those, streaking stars going by you like a hyperspace effect. And really, I think overall that's the thing I like best about this game from beginning to end, is its environmental designs. I hate pretty much all of the character designs, at least in a Space Harrier context. I mean, in other contexts, I wouldn't be crazy about them, but they might be a little less annoying. But anywho, the environment designs are pretty cool. They don't look as spectacular as they did in the year 2000, of course, and the level of detail and the length of the levels means that there aren't going to be as many of them. Space Harrier having had 18 levels and this game having just 5. But they look cool. It's enjoyable to see them fly by, and that part I really have no problem with. It's what you do in them that I kind of part company with. I really wish this game did a little bit to establish a story for itself. I mean, I might not like it, but what's going on here seems kind of interesting. It's like we were flying through some giant space battleship. Now it seems to have deployed its nose cone, and we've got a couple of kind of Dom-style enemies, actually. Or maybe they're just guys in mecha suits. But this is a multi-part boss where we have Deimos, Mars, and what's the other one? Well, we'll find it eventually when I get a lock on it. And you just have to bring down each component, and you will be free to proceed. Looks like we're just about done with it there. And now, if I am not mistaken, we're going to be in the final stretch to the final boss. But before we get there, we're going to have some enemies with some more cool projectile concepts. Again, I like the what this game does with the variety of projectiles. You have the rings in the first stage, you have these sort of bar-shaped ones, and you have the... oh, did I say sea urchins? When I meant sea urchins, I meant sea stars. You had the sea star type enemies earlier that would extend all their tentacles into spikes, and you would have to weave your way through those. I like stuff like that. I think in a more faithful Space Harrier sequel, things like that would totally have a place. Oh, are we end boss time? I think we might be end boss time. Nope, not quite yet. Ah, that's right, we got another wave of folks with ring lasers, and this time they are far more tightly grouped ring lasers, and once again, the projectile variation in this game ends up being pretty cool. Weaving your way through all of these ring shots, trying not to hit the exterior, feels good. It's exciting, it's fun. More of that, please. As always, your mileage may vary, but I'm just calling it like I sees it. We'll just have one or two more waves of these guys, and then we will be end boss. Got a nice selection of health ups there, which I managed somehow to completely miss. No, I did get one of them.
You're approaching the boss.
And our end boss is this array of cubes named Deadlies. Now, rumor has it, I don't know if this is true or not for sure, but rumor has it that the original name for this boss was going to be Deadtris. You know, like Tetris because it's made out of cubes, but it's trying to kill you, so Deadtris. And that would be a gag, but at least it would be a decent gag, but I guess maybe they were worried about having a legal challenge from Nintendo on that, so if it was supposed to happen, ultimately Deadtris did not happen, and we got left with the name Deadlies, which is just kind of dumb. That said, although I have no idea what its deal is supposed to be, Deadlies is kind of a cool design in that the cubes all fly around into arrangements that take the shape of things, and if you look at the boss life bar, you can see what it's supposed to be. Like right now it's a deer head, so it says deer, then bat, then now it's a steam iron. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch it during my recordings, but one of the shapes it can take is called Dreamcast, and it's just a big swirl like the Dreamcast logo. So that was a nice little shout-out by Sega to its current console at the time. R.I.P. Dreamcast, mourn you till I join you. And as you blast away at more and more of deadlies, you destroy more and more of the cubes, which changes the shapes it has available to form itself into. I think we're already past the point at which it would be able to form Dreamcast. Oh, and by the way, I don't know what that is that keeps moving in front of the camera. I kind of wonder if we've gotten caught in part of the background model, and it's just getting between us and the view of things. Because that doesn't always happen, even in the demo emulation of this game. Every now and then it'll happen, but usually we have an unobstructed view. But this time I think we just got caught in one of the background models, and it's obstructing my view a bit. Which is a bummer, but well, you can at least see what this boss is supposed to look like, or how it's supposed to work, more or less. Talk to the hand. Another thing that's nice about this particular boss design is that it has a wide range of attack types. What it'll use to attack you with, be it ring lasers, straightforward lasers, or whatever, all depends on what form it's in at the moment, so it's morphing and rearranging its cubes into different shapes isn't just a cosmetic thing. It actually affects the gameplay, so good job Sega on that one. Or good job Amusement Vision, I suppose I should say. Cower in fear at the toothbrush and the camera. Another of the things that it can form into is a bar meter for a cell phone. I can't remember what it's called, but I thought that was kind of ticklish. Unfortunately, that was another thing I didn't catch in this recording. But we did get the toilet symbol, which just appears to be the men and women restroom sign, so there's that, I suppose. It's getting pretty far down toward its last set of cubes here. It can only take fairly small and simple shapes at this point. So progress is being made. And the last form is die. Just a dice, a single cube. And that is all she wrote for Deadlies, or Deadtris, or whatever you care to call it.
Game cleared.
That was easy.
You shut your whore mouth, Glenn. Alright, and just like the intro, in the end of this thing, we don't get any real sense of what this was all about. All it does is run you through the credits, which obviously are not working correctly in demo at this point. And, all you good credited staff folks at Amusement Vision, I have to say, you tried. And I appreciate the effort. I know you put a lot of effort into this game. The visuals were fantastic when it came out, and some of them still look pretty good, like the hyperspace sequence. But Hal, I don't know what the hell you were doing. The music for this was just kind of there. Gotta question the character design, gotta question what really makes this a Harrier game as opposed to some sort of Afterburner hybrid. But really, I suppose I'm beating a dead horse at this point. I've been going on about what my perceived shortcomings of this game are pretty much the whole time. Oh, and there's a little cameo from Spike, from the other Sega arcade game Spike Out. So that's another nice little tip of the hat, I suppose. In remembrance of all dear games born in the 20th century. Well, Amusement Vision, I appreciate the sentiment, but I wish you had had a better understanding of what made those previous century games good, and a little more respect for the one that you were following up. But again, that's just me. If you like Planet Harriers, and I know there are quite a few people out there who genuinely do, I ain't mad at you. You know, it takes all kinds, and that's the great thing of living in the free world, but all I can give you is my honest take, and my honest take is that Planet Harriers just doesn't really work. As a Space Harrier game, it's completely off the mark, and as just an independent game on its own merits, it does a little better that way, but I think it still has problems. The aiming method and the lock-on dependency don't really seem to fit the pace of it. There are sections of it, like Star Eater and the Speed Tunnel, that just feel like complete bullshit that you really can't do the way they expect you to do. And yeah, I guess the most damning thing I can say about Planet Harriers is that after this, I really feel no particular desire to return to it. The original Space Harrier, like decades later, I can still pick it up any time, play the hell out of it, and have a fantastic time. It remains my favorite game of all time, and while the technology has aged, I don't feel the gameplay really has lost anything. And Afterburner Climax, again, I'm not that big of an Afterburner guy historically, but that's an Afterburner game I can pick up and have a fantastic time with. And if I look at Planet Harriers as sort of a mutant Afterburner game, I still don't think it works anywhere near as effectively as Climax does. Well, we're really past the end of the video here, but just to make one more point before I sign off for the day. I'm sure some folks are going to be feeling that I'm stuck in the past and that I never want anything to change or to grow or evolve. And to a degree, I suppose that's a fair cop. I do play more classic games than I do modern ones these days. I still love the Yakuzas as they come out. I still love the Soul series, but I guess to a degree I am a little bit stuck in the past, but I think there are things you could do with a new Space Harrier game that would be evolutionary steps, that would bring new things to the series without completely throwing away its heart and soul. And I must sound like the biggest dork in the world talking about a game's heart and soul, but I talk about video games on the internet, so that ship sailed a long time ago. I really think there are things you could do with the Space Harrier formula that would keep that kernel of the original game there, and would still work as a new experience. I mean, you could do a bullet time thing like they do in Afterburner Climax, and I think that could fit in just fine. You could have levels that aren't just a straight sprint to the horizon the whole time, that like twist through tunnels or go around corners while still maintaining the forward shooting, forward aiming mechanic. Really, I think there are all kind of places you could go with it. You could use some of the environmental designs that were in Planet Harriers, like a hyperspace segment or an underwater segment, and I think those could be great if they were done right. But this just wasn't the game to do them, and when all is said and done, that's just how I feel about it. Well, for as much of a tonal shift as Planet Harriers was from Space Harrier, this has been a major tonal shift from my usual videos. Again, usually I just don't cover games that I don't really like, but this time I'm covering a whole series. This is part of the series, so I'm gonna give you my sincere 2 cents on it. Whatever the case, I hope I have at least made the case for how I feel about Planet Harriers, even if you don't agree with me, and I hope regardless that you have enjoyed the journey. It is always a pleasure having you along, folks, and I hope to see you again very soon for the next episode, in which we move beyond the Space Harrier series proper and start looking at some of the friends. Games that are more tangentially related to Space Harrier, or inspired by it, that share some of the same core mechanics and, kind of can be considered descendants of it. So, hopefully I will see you then, and in the meantime, take care and have a good one. Today's unusual episode of Space Harrier and Friends has been brought to you by Justin Carpenter, Nolden, Zangamarth, Charlie Dunst, Anonymous Benefactor, John Madigan, Johnny Millennium, Sanguine Games, Misha Van Doren, Craig Patterson, Frank Rizzi, Tim J., Lolo DePuzlo, Joshua C. Ritchie, Jared C. Rice, Darren Chow, Sonic Rose, EX Potemkin, Alicia Goranson, Argyle Jelly, Mechasaurus, DG Jono, Doug Russell, August Fortnite, and the rest of my very generous patrons. Thank you all for helping to keep me in Hikaru board blingy, and thank you to everyone commenting, subscribing, and watching. This is wishing a very happy Easter to all those celebrating such, and signing off.